Security chief says changes to local extradition laws are essential for Hong Kong. The government retables plan on adjusting cross-harbor tunnel tolls, but skeptical lawmakers remain opposed. And the U.S. and North Korea offered differing accounts over why the second summit between Trump and Kim failed.
Good evening. The security chief has defended proposed changes to the current extradition law. John Lee says the changes are needed to ensure the security of Hong Kong. Caleb Leung reports.
Should we allow a person who has committed a serious crime to escape justice and pose a serious threat to the citizens of Hong Kong? That was the question the security chief asked when commenting on proposed changes to existing extradition laws.
We aim to amend the law so that we are not forbidden to start discussing with jurisdictions with which we have no long-term agreement.
The proposal was triggered after a Hong Kong resident was accused of killing his girlfriend in Taiwan last year. That's exposed a loophole in the city's current extradition laws because authorities here couldn't legally extradite the suspect to Taiwan. Lee stressed there are enough safeguards to ensure the amended law will be used properly.
The proposal is aiming at one single standard applicable to all places around the world based on the case merits without considering all other factors except the safeguards that have long been laid down in the present Fugitive Offenders Ordinance.
On a separate issue, Lee also talked about the government's report to Beijing on the banning of the Hong Kong National Party. Lee repeated what the chief executive had earlier said.
The report would likely contain the whole process regarding how the prohibition order was issued and dealt with in accordance with society's ordinance, the legal procedures, and also the facts involved in the matter.
Carrie Lam said she would prefer to make the report public, but will first seek legal advice. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
The government is resubmitting plans later this month on adjusting cross-harbor tunnel tolls. Despite a promise to review the city's traffic system, there will be no changes to the actual toll adjustments. Kina Chu has more.
A new attempt by the government to table a non-binding motion on cross-harbor tunnel toll adjustments at the Legislative Council. This came after it withdrew its toll adjustment proposal at the legislature in January. That was after lawmakers criticized the proposal for raising tolls for private vehicles at 2 out of 3 harbor crossings. The coming motion, which will be tabled on the 27th of this month, will include some new measures, but don't expect any changes to the proposed tolls from the last bill.
I wouldn't speculate what's going to happen in the days and months to come, right? But our focus as of now is to make our best endeavor to convince our legislators to give us the green signal to go ahead.
The latest proposal includes setting up a smart transportation fund of around $900 million to study using technology to improve road safety. The money will come from the toll surpluses. The government also promised to complete a holistic review on all government tunnels and roads. It also promised to launch a study on congestion charging, which encourages travelers to use public transport instead of their cars. This will be completed before the Western Harbor Crossing franchise expires in 2023. Pan-democratic and pro-establishment lawmakers remain skeptical.
Those new measures proposed by the government is not attractive. We do think the percentage of the increase is too much for the drivers. And we doubt the accuracy for the government, whether they can precisely estimate the consequence.
Even with the introduction of two measures that proposed by the government today, we cannot see that the new measure, the new scheme, will solve the traffic jam problem very effectively.
Frank Chan says should the proposal fail to pass, the matter will be handled when the government retrieves the Western Harbor Crossing franchise in 2023. Kana Chu, TVB News.
Vice Premier Han Zheng declared that Beijing's degree of attention on the Greater Bay Area's development is unprecedented. Han's comments were made as he chaired a meeting of the leading group for the development of the Greater Bay Area. The group's second meeting was held at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing today. Participants included mainland officials and the chief executives of Hong Kong and Macau. After the meeting, Chief Executive Carrie Lam said the group agreed on 8 measures. These include how the 183 days limit will be calculated before Hong Kong people living on the mainland are subject to Chinese tax.
Whether it is in the definition of this 183 days. Now it is very clear that for sort of day return trips into the Greater Bay Area, since it does not last longer than 24 hours, it is not a day in the definition of the tax policy.
Turning overseas, the U.S. and North Korea are offering contradictory accounts of why the summit between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un broke down. But both point to a disagreement over punishing sanctions as the sticking point in the high-stakes nuclear negotiation. Alan Booknia reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump, who returned to the White House last night, said before leaving Hanoi that the talks collapsed because of the North Korean leader's insistence that all sanctions imposed on Pyongyang be lifted.
Actually, it was a very productive 2 days, but sometimes you have to walk.
But after Trump left Vietnam, North Korea's foreign minister offered a different account. Ri Yong-ho said the North asked for only a partial lifting of sanctions that hamper the civilian economy and affect the livelihood of people in exchange for shutting down its main nuclear complex. Ri added that Kim was also ready to offer in writing a permanent halt to the North's nuclear and intercontinental ballistic missile tests, and Washington had squandered an opportunity that may not come again. In Washington, even Trump bashers agreed with the president's actions.
President Trump did the right thing by walking away and not cutting a poor deal for the sake of a photo op. Just like the president, I want a deal with North Korea that would bring an end to the conflict and change the course of the region. However, I've always been concerned about the possibility of a bad deal, especially with the other pressures currently on the president.
While Kim offered to dismantle its main nuclear complex in Yongbyon, U.S. intelligence indicates that's just part of Pyongyang's nuclear program.
It appears the president talked about other nuclear-related facilities. He may have disclosed or discussed intelligence information. He talked about the North Koreans were surprised at what we knew.
There has long been skepticism that Kim would be willing to give away weapons his nation had spent decades developing and that Pyongyang feels ensures its survival. Alan Booknia, TVB News.
Meanwhile, South Korean President Moon Jae-in says his government will discuss with the United States the possibility of restarting joint inter-Korean projects to help nuclear negotiations. Moon was speaking at a ceremony commemorating the 100th anniversary of the uprising by Koreans against Japanese colonial rule. The breakdown in the U.S.-North Korea nuclear talks is a setback for Moon, who is hoping to stabilize relations with Pyongyang. If the nuclear negotiations derail, Moon could potentially face a serious dilemma, whether to continue to engage with the North or join another U.S.-led pressure campaign against it.
In an effort to de-escalate tensions, Pakistan has just released an Indian pilot it had captured during cross-border attacks between the two countries. This comes as world leaders scramble to head off an all-out war between the arch-enemies.
Tens of thousands of Pakistani and Indian soldiers are facing off along the Kashmir boundary known as the Line of Control. This as tensions continue to run high since Indian aircraft crossed into Pakistan on Tuesday and carried out what India called a preemptive strike against militants. The militants are blamed for a February 14th suicide bombing in Indian-controlled Kashmir that killed 40 Indian troops. That's when Pakistan retaliated and shot down 2 Indian aircraft on Wednesday and captured this pilot. On the Indian side of Pakistan's border crossing at Wagah, local police joined a group of cheering Indians. They gathered there to welcome home their Indian pilot in Pakistan's custody.
As a peace gesture.
Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan vowed to hand over the pilot as a gesture of peace. Still, shelling continued for a 3rd straight night, even as the United States, China, the European Union, and other powers urged restraint from the 2 nuclear-armed neighbors. But striving for peace is not what's happening, according to one analyst.
Both sides have passed on the message that they want, that any future attack by terrorist groups, either deriving their ideology from Pakistan or operational capability from Pakistan, there will be a retaliation. And the similar side, I think on the Pakistan side, there is a sense that, well, if the Indians are going to retaliate or attack, then we will also retaliate.
In Pakistan, more than 100 protesters marched through the streets with a mock missile. They're protesting against the Indian strikes, warning their country's armed forces are ready to combat India. Having lived through 2 wars with India, residents in this Pakistani border village vowed to fight India to the death. India is reportedly building more than 14,000 bunkers for families living along the border in an effort to keep them safe as artillery shells continue to scream over them.
And coming up on the main news, more details on how budget money will be spent on healthcare. Looming indictment threatens Netanyahu's political career. And Oscar-winning composer Andre Previn dies.
I have never done anything this important in my entire life.
It's a rocky road.
This is my worst nightmare.
Oh dear. To being named.
A remarkable, delicious dish.
Thank you, Chef.
Monday, MasterChef Junior, Season 5 at 8:30 on Pearl.
That was what we moved here for, was to breed alpacas.
It was the biggest impulsive decision they made, and it turned out to be one of their best.
We just fell in love with it. We got caught along with the excitement. I feel confident in what we do here.
Monday, Where the Wild Men Are, with Ben Fogle, Season 5 at 9:35 on Pearl.
秋冬嚟臨，敏感肌又要受難，燕麥時刻守護 Aveeno Skin Relief 保濕乳，精選3重燕麥，從基底鎖住水分，修復肌膚屏障，使用一次顯著修護乾燥敏感肌 Aveeno Active Naturals。
Here's a quick tip for finding your ideal hotel. 1. Go to Trivago. 2. Find the hotel you want. 3. Compare the different prices for the same hotel at once. That's it. Easy. Hotel Trivago.
有啲嘢可以放低一時，但好難放低一世。富衛相信退休之後，你可以更盡情去做你一直想做嘅自己。我哋會為你度身訂造退休3大範疇，結合儲蓄、保障、傳承，全方位支持你退休任我行。FWD 富衛保險。
And you? What would you do for love? Miss Dior, the new eau de toilette.
The largest cave castle in the world is Slovenia's Pajama Castle. What secrets, intrigue, and natural mysteries do these mountains protect? Tuesday, Oriental Watch Company Spectacular Tuesday presents Wild Castles at 9:35 on Pearl.
I couldn't get him to eat anything else.
What appears to be fussy eating could be the symptom of a deeply entrenched psychological disorder.
He went blind from malnutrition.
It has a heightened sense of kind of anxiety and refusal to it that most parents know isn't right.
Wednesday, the truth about fussy eaters at 8:30 on Pearl's Wellbeing.
Welcome back to TVB News. The Secretary for Food and Health today elaborated on how the money from the new budget will be used to tackle pressing issues in healthcare. Our Haley Joe reports.
This year, the hospital authority has about $70 billion to use, along with the additional $700 million set aside specifically to address manpower issues in public hospitals. But how will the money be used?
We have asked the hospital authority to prepare a medium to long-term manpower plan with the numbers that is required. Then we would look at what are some of the existing strategies, what are the supply, from, for example, graduating from universities, and also what are the numbers that the hospital authority can secure through, for example, part-time, retire and rehire scheme.
Some accuse the $10 billion Public Healthcare Stabilization Fund of being a blank check rather than something set aside for unexpected circumstances. The hospital authority chief says this fund will help keep doctors in the public sector by enhancing their job security in times of economic uncertainty.
Frontline doctors, they're afraid that in the future there may be similar economic downturn. Then we withdraw funding from this stabilizing fund, so that we are not going to cut the service for public. At the same time, we're not going to cut the number of staff.
Meanwhile, the proposed budget has also been criticized for increasing the tax burden with lowered ceilings for salaries and profits tax, as well as the rates waiver. The financial secretary disagreed.
The current proposed 20,000, say for example, salaries tax rebate, is quite generous. If we exclude the housing reserve to be written back to the account, the coming year will be a deficit to the order of about $5 billion. At the moment, the situation is not easy, but also at the same time, we should not be overreacting.
Still, Chen did promise to put out additional relief measures whenever necessary, even before the next budget. Haley Joe, TVB News.
Overseas again, Israel's Attorney General has announced plans to indict Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on corruption charges just 6 weeks before a hotly contested national election. It marks the first time a sitting leader has been put on official notice of planned prosecution, but Netanyahu denies the charges. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in the hot seat after becoming the first incumbent to be put on notice of a planned prosecution. According to the country's Attorney General Avichai Mendel-Blit, the 69-year-old is suspected of wrongfully accepting $264,000 worth of gifts, including cigars and champagne from tycoons. He is also accused of dispensing favors in alleged bids for more favorable coverage by an Israeli newspaper and a website. Shortly after the Attorney General's announcement, the embattled leader wasted no time in challenging those allegations on national television. Netanyahu pointed at his leftist opponents for carrying out an unprecedented witch hunt aimed at toppling the right-wing government. The left is doing this because they know they can't beat us at the ballot box, a defiant Netanyahu said. I plan on serving you and the state as prime minister for many years. Netanyahu could face up to a decade in prison if convicted of bribery, and a maximum 3-year term for fraud and breach of trust. Netanyahu's political opponents, including centrist challenger Benny Gantz, jumped at the chance to call for his resignation. Gantz, who has emerged as one of the leading challengers in the upcoming election, ruled out sitting alongside Netanyahu in government. But the actual filing of the 3 charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust against Netanyahu would depend on the outcome of a final hearing, which could take months to complete. The required hearing could take place after the April 9th election, which gives Netanyahu time to persuade the Attorney General not to indict him. Netanyahu, who touted his achievements for the country, could even cite public interest in arguing against an indictment. The FBI has announced the biggest repatriation of cultural artifacts and relics to China. A total of 361 items were returned in a joint effort with China's National Cultural Heritage Administration.
We were able to identify a total of 361 objects that rightfully belong to the People's Republic of China. Today, those pieces go home. For the people of China, the measure and value of these artifacts cannot be weighed against arbitrary market value. For them, these pieces represent a vast history, a rich heritage that dates back millennia, and that demonstrates the skill and imagination of generations of artisans and craftsmen. They define who they were and give rise to who they will become.
According to the FBI, the return of the artifacts was the culmination of nearly 5 years of hard work involving handling and identifying the rightful owners. In 2014, the Fed seized thousands of cultural items and artifacts from around the world, and even the remains of hundreds of Native Americans from a farmhouse in Indiana. Beijing applauded the repatriation of the relics, saying it contributes to the mutual understanding and trust between the two nations.
Dozens of people are dead in Somalia after al-Shabaab fighters carried out an attack in the capital. A gun battle between Somali soldiers and al-Shabaab continues to rage in Mogadishu. At least 80 others were injured when a car bomb exploded near a busy hotel. A spokesman for the Islamic militants claims they've taken control of the hotel. He also claims it was targeted because government officials frequently stay there. Oscar-winning composer Andre Previn has died at the age of 89. Previn was a child prodigy whose family fled Nazi Germany. As a teenager, he found work as a composer in Hollywood. That's where he won 4 Oscars on musicals like My Fair Lady and Gigi. Previn later abandoned Hollywood for a career as a classical conductor. He was named musical director of the Houston Symphony back in 1967. He went on to lead renowned orchestras like the London's Royal Philharmonic and the Los Angeles Philharmonic. Through his career, Previn continued to dip in and out of the jazz world. His ex-wife, actress Mia Farrow, tweeted, "May he rest in glorious symphonies."
I think it was a mushroom.
Jeff, what do you have for us in sports?
A lot of basketball. Aaron Gordon scored 22 points and held down 15 rebounds as Orlando dumped Golden State 103-96. The win moves the Magic to a tie for the final playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. The Warriors have lost 4 of their past 6 games. Meanwhile, James Harden was at it again. The Beard went off for 58 points as the Houston Rockets overcame a 21-point deficit to beat the Miami Heat 121-118. It's the 6th time this season Harden has scored 50 points or more in a game. Tobias Harris scored a game-high 32 points as the Philadelphia 76ers topped Oklahoma City 108-104. The win for Philly was their first over OKC since November 2008. The Sixers had lost 19 straight to the Thunder, the longest active streak by one team over another in the NBA. Russell Westbrook had a triple-double of 23 points, 11 rebounds, and 11 assists in the loss. To tennis, Nick Kyrgios moved into the semi-finals of the Mexico Open after a 3-set win over Stan Wawrinka. The victory comes a day after he beat top seed Rafael Nadal. After the loss, the Spaniard claimed the Aussie lacked respect for the sport, the tennis public and himself. The comments had to do with Kyrgios' antics, which included him serving underhanded in beating Nadal. Kyrgios had to overcome a hand injury and leg cramps against Wawrinka. 7-5, 6-7, 6-4 were the set scores. The 23-year-old Australian will now face third-seeded John Isner for a chance to advance to the final. Meanwhile, Roger Federer is into the last 4 of the Dubai Championship. The Swiss maestro was a 7-6, 6-4 winner over Hungary's Martin Fucsovics. Federer is now 2 matches away from his 100th career title. Jimmy Connors is the only other male player with 100 tournament victories. In baseball, the Philadelphia Phillies lured Washington Nationals outfielder Bryce Harper to the city of brotherly love. The two sides reportedly agreed to a 13-year, $330 million deal that would be the largest ever guaranteed contract in North American sports. The 26-year-old is a six-time All-Star and was National League MVP in 2015. To golf, plenty of birdies on the PGA National Resort course at the Honda Classic in Florida. Jonathan Vegas shot a bogey-free 6 under 64 to take a two-stroke lead after the opening round. Ricky Fowler is 3 back. Defending champion Justin Thomas shot 68.
And from all of us, thanks for joining us and have a fantastic weekend.
Good night.
每逢港股交易日，紧贴下午投资市况，搜罗内地主要财经资讯，专家重点分析，普通话详尽报道。光大新鸿基金禧50年呈现交易直播室，星期一至五，明珠台。